Chapter 3, Part 3. Craft stores make him break out in metaphorical hives. Keith thinks, as he stands in line at the checkout, that it might turn into literal hives if he's stuck here much longer. Something about the fake flowers and the white women beaming emptily from cookbook covers. At 2 p.m. on a Thursday, there's only one person manning the checkout. An older woman who strikes him as the retired but got bored type. She stops to chat with every customer, most of whom seem to be regulars, and it's nice of her and all, but... Keith grinds his teeth as he realizes he'd started bouncing on the balls of his feet sometime in the last 3 minutes. Fuck. Desperate for a distraction, he eyes the shelves that shore up the checkout line. All the better to prompt impulse purchasing. Tucked between more of those damned cookbooks and more magazines than he knew existed about crafts is a section for kids. Little plastic toys and a Play-Doh set and coloring books. It's the last that he finds himself staring at. Probably more intensely than the slender books really warrant. One of the foster homes he'd stayed at, he's pretty sure it was the second, maybe the third, had been in a nicer area. The father was a doctor. The mother was a lawyer. They had 2 older children, both in high school when Keith was only in 3rd grade, who were nice enough. Everyone left him alone. That was fine. Anyway, Keith had to go when the oldest kid got into an Ivy League college. Not enough money to go around. But before then, he'd had his own room and as many art supplies as he wanted. None of the homes he went to after let him have coloring books. Too expensive. Probably even if he had been given coloring books, he wouldn't have stuck around long enough to make use of them before he was running. Keith's got a stack of coloring books in his hands and a pack of crayons before he can think better of it. It would be sensible to put them back. Still too expensive. And when is he going to have time to color? Even as he thinks it, his fingers tighten around the new prizes with a surprising amount of possessiveness. Stupid, but he wants them. Later, in his room, he carefully dumps out all the supplies he'd bought on his desk. Note cards, markers, stickers. 1 tube of glitter to be used only in dire need. A small wooden recipe box that he'll repurpose. Ribbon. The thing is, his desire to indulge Shiro has always outstripped his wallet's actual capacity. It's worth going hungry a couple nights a week to be able to see Shiro's eyes light up when Keith gives him a subscription to that astronomy journal that he'd been going on about. Only Shiro disapproves of that, of Keith going hungry to buy him things, so Keith doesn't get away with it as much as he'd like. Instead, he does things for Shiro. Truck tune-ups, flashcards, the occasional backup in bar fights, which keeps him from total poverty while soothing his need to make Shiro happy. But that's never translated into how he's handled birthdays. Last year, he'd subsisted off of ramen for 3 months to save up for a weekend trip to the Kitt Peak National Observatory. In comparison, this feels almost like a cop-out. Ripping open a package of note cards, he reminds himself that this is what Shiro wants. Not the coupons specifically, but the time and care spent on creating a handmade gift, and the thought needed behind each coupon, and the fact that this would ensure they spend time together, and maybe Keith, soft and sweet, being a good boy for Shiro. Hours pass as Keith makes coupons. I owe you. Mac and cheese dinner. Laundry. 3 hours of watching Ancient Aliens without complaining or making fun of the experts. Once he's got the words down, he decorates the coupon with drawings and stickers. Sometimes it takes him a couple of tries to get it looking the way he wants. If he's going to do this, he feels like he needs to give it his all, and he's nothing if not determined. The wooden box fills up slowly. Eventually, he stops being self-conscious and builds up a good rhythm. By the time he's down to his last blank card, his hands are smeared with marker stains and his shoulders ache from hunching over the desk for so long. Weirdly, he feels proud. Each one of these coupons is proof that he thought carefully about what Shiro values. No one else could have made this. Out of everyone in the world, only Keith knows Shiro well enough to have filled out over 100 note cards with specialized IOUs. That counts for something, he's pretty sure. Now he just has to decide what to put on the last card. Tapping the edge of the card against his desk, he lets his gaze and his mind drift. Everything obvious has already been exhausted. No. That's a lie. Some obvious options. I owe you one night to fuck me any way you want me, are still technically on the table. If he's willing to give up all dignity and subtlety, which, for the record, he's not. With a groan, he slumps deeper into his chair and swivels away from his desk. It's mid-chair swivel that he spots the other bag from the craft store. The one that still contains the coloring books and crayons he'd impulsively bought. Keith freezes. Probably it's the exhaustion. Closing in on 2 a.m, of course he's tired. No wonder he's not thinking straight. But the fantasy that pops unbidden into his mind is fully formed. What would it be like to color with Shiro? They do it at the coffee table. Spread out the crayons and have a Disney movie going in the background. He could wear his sweatshirt and sit in Shiro's lap, one of those muscular arms around his waist to keep him still and secure. Indulgent as Shiro is, he probably wouldn't even protest if he only got to color the crappy pages that Keith didn't want. And when Keith finished a page and held it up, every section colored neatly within the lines. Shiro would press a kiss to the side of his head and tell him how good. Jerking violently out of his daydream, Keith swivels back toward his desk and ignores the flush crawling up his neck. 15 minutes later, he drops the coloring books on his desk next to the wooden box. Ribbon circles the box neatly, a guard against regret and reopening the present. Keith's hands are stained with even more ink, and he knows instinctively that when he's more awake, he will regret that last card. But for now, he pushes that away in favor of crawling into bed. Like they do every year for every birthday, they go to the one bar off campus that only bothers to card at the actual bar. Or, more accurately, the one bar off campus that does a shitty job carding. Both are accurate. It's still early enough that they're able to claim the biggest booth in the back, tucked into the jukebox and the pool tables. Makes it a slug to get to the bar, but only 3 of them are old enough to buy alcohol legally anyway, so it's fine. Allura buys the first round, shots to get the night started off right. Keith buys the second round, beers they sip on as Shiro opens his presents. That's not entirely true. Most everyone does go for beers for the second round. Keith doesn't. Needs something stronger to combat both his nerves and the fact that he's all but in Shiro's lap because the biggest booth is still too damn small for their group. Whiskey slides easily down his throat and numbs the edges pleasantly. Sure, he doesn't quite know how to join in the teasing and the toasting, but he's okay. He's able to enjoy Shiro's abashed delight as he opens each new gift. At least until Shiro reaches the bottom of the pile and finds Keith's box, with its single red ribbon tied in a messy bow, and the nerves turn into outright nausea. Shiro tugs the ribbon loose and coils it thoughtfully around his fingers. When he opens the lid, Keith wishes he could look away. Instead, he watches, trying to annotate the reaction to his present as Shiro quietly thumbs through the cards.
Does anybody else feel like they're missing something?
Lance stage whispers. Tries to stage whisper. It's more like a stage yell. He's never been great at holding his liquor. Ignoring the heat at the back of his neck, Keith turns his gaze down to his half-empty glass of whiskey and contemplates downing the rest of it like a shot. Probably wouldn't end well, but at least he'd have a reason for his steadily escalating blush. Someone must elbow Lance, or pinch him. Either way, he lets out an indignant squawk, followed by,
I'm just saying, it feels like we're missing something.
The table jostles as he tries to throw his arms out for emphasis. Oh my god, Pidge says. Allura clears her throat and wraps her knuckles against the tabletop. I believe you all promised to show me how to play pool. We should do that now, before it becomes crowded. This is an obvious ploy to get them all out of what's rapidly becoming an uncomfortable situation. For all their past issues, in this moment, Keith could hug her. Everyone clears out, and Keith's getting ready to follow them out when Shiro's hand lands on his thigh. Wait, Shiro says. Like he's not already anchoring Keith in place. Reluctantly, Keith turns his head to meet Shiro's gaze. Fuck. He really, really, really hopes that his blush is going to be excused as an alcohol meets pale skin thing instead of the embarrassment meets pale skin thing it actually is. Yeah? You made these? Not what Keith was expecting. Then again, he's not sure what he was expecting. Yeah. He thinks of the last coupon he put in the box. Wishes he'd been smarter, or at least more of a coward. Swallowing past the lump in his throat, he adds, You don't have to use all of them. Or any of them. If you don't want to. Somehow, he's avoided making eye contact, but then Shiro squeezes his thigh again, and he looks up on reflex. It's hard to judge his expression, and the dim bar lighting isn't helping with that. Shiro's still touching him, though. That counts for something. Their friends chose the pool table furthest away from their booth. Even so, Shiro ducks closer before asking, You've got coloring books? Yeah, Keith says. He doesn't know if he should be grateful that Shiro is trying to preserve his dignity by keeping their friends from overhearing, or distinctly ungrateful because it's hard to focus when Shiro's lips are all but brushing his temple. I saw them at the store when I was getting this stuff for your present. And I thought... You thought? Closing his eyes, Keith sucks in a deep breath and thinks that the idea of liquid courage must hold some weight. Liquid courage or liquid stupidity. The words come tumbling out anyway. I haven't colored since before, either. Like, with the cartoons. But I like watching cartoons with you, and I thought that maybe I'd like coloring with you. Mostly, he just wanted not to sound too needy. Too clingy. Too much like a baby. In retrospect, he's pretty sure he didn't succeed. I guess that one is more for me than you. You really don't have to use them, if you don't want to. A firm kiss is pressed to his temple. It knocks the breath out of his lungs and the insecurities out of his head. Okay, Shiro says. Last question. When Keith blinks open his eyes, he sees the "I owe you" coloring together card held between two of Shiro's fingers. Do I get to keep a picture you colored when I use this? Yeah, if you want. They're still close enough that Keith feels when Shiro's lips turn up in a smile. Good. Nudging his nose against Keith's hairline, he adds, "This is my favorite present. You did so good." And suddenly, Keith doesn't care how anyone interprets his blush. Over the next 3 hours, Shiro burns through 5 of his coupons. When Keith tries to chide him that he should save them, Shiro just leans into his space and says, "But it's my birthday. They shouldn't count on my birthday." It's stupidly convincing. A card reading, "I owe you a round of drinks," has Keith rolling his eyes and heading for the bar. He flags the bartender easily enough, but the woman's busy, so he settles in for the inevitable wait. 2 or maybe 3 minutes in, he feels someone lean into his space, which is the most fucking unnecessary thing. No one's crowding this end of the bar. "Here for Shiro's birthday?" asks the leaner. "Griffin," Keith says. It's a show of goodwill that he doesn't grit the name out between his teeth. Straightening up, he inches away from the other man until it feels like he can breathe without their skin brushing. Starting a fight on Shiro's birthday is a bad idea, which means he needs to behave. At least until he can get the drinks and leave. Oblivious to the bitter end, Griffin leans in closer and closes the tiny bit of distance Keith managed to create. "So, is it for Shiro's birthday?" he asks again. One of his hands drops to the scarred bar top. It's too close to Keith's own. "Or are you looking for someone to buy you a drink?" There's a tick starting in Keith's jaw. "Birthday," he says. Whatever he's expecting, it's not for Griffin to lean even closer and laugh. Strike that. Keith's never surprised when Griffin laughs at him. It's just that he's not sure why Griffin keeps getting into his space. That mostly stopped after the last time Keith decked him. "Of course," Griffin says. "You don't let people buy you drinks, do you?" "No." Short. To the point. No room for argument. Most of the time, when he says things that way, people are smart enough to drop the conversation and find an excuse to get out of his way. Griffin just laughs. Chuckles, really. Indulgently amused. It occurs to Keith that Griffin has a lot more in common with Allura's ex than he'd previously realized. Their hands are still too close together, but Keith doesn't know how to pull his hand away without making it seem like a retreat. "Maybe you should consider it," Griffin says. "Consider what?" The bar smells like bars do, but Griffin smells like expensive cologne. "Letting people buy you drinks." Keith wants to leave, but the bartender's coming his way, and if he suffered this long, he might as well finish the job. Griffin's still talking. "For Shiro's sake. Half the people in this bar want a chance at him, and you're scaring all of them off." If this is true, then all the people in this bar want a chance at Shiro. As the bar filled up, people swung by to wish Shiro all the best, and buy him drinks, and slap his back. Or his ass. But probably Griffin's referring to himself. Keith figured out pretty early on that Griffin's into Shiro. It's the one bone of contention that they always circle back to. Even more than they circle back to old middle school hurts, or the time that Griffin mocked Keith's foster home. Griffin's always implied he'd be better for Shiro than Keith is. Turns out he's probably not wrong. Griffin's exactly the kind of eager-to-please teacher's pet that probably wouldn't have any problems unlocking his natural submissiveness. Fuck. The bartender asks what he wants, and Keith orders on autopilot. I'll cover his tab, Griffin says. It takes a few seconds for that to process, and the bartender's gone before Keith can protest. Large hands cup Keith's hips and tug him back. There's no stopping the instinctive flinch, the way he jolts half a step forward. But there's also no stopping the way his muscles go lax as he finally registers that one of the hands is sleek, metallic prosthetic. When Shiro tugs again, Keith goes willingly, letting himself be pulled into the shadow of Shiro's greater bulk. The prosthetic slips forward and curls around his waist, anchoring their bodies together. Hey there, James, Shiro says. Griffin's eyes are a little wide and his mouth is a little open. Hi, Shiro, he says. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but Keith thinks he might hear a touch of squeakiness to Griffin's voice. What were you two talking about? Sometimes Keith really hates how friendly Shiro is. With a grunt, he turns in Shiro's hold and buries his face in Shiro's pecs. For the first time in minutes, he can't smell the bar or Griffin, and it quells some of the nausea he hadn't even noticed churning in his gut. Buying drinks, he says. Then, out of spite, or pity, or both, he adds, Griffin bought this round. The arm curled around Keith's waist tightens briefly. Did you? Shiro asks. Guess I should thank you. No need, Griffin says. It was my pleasure. Happy birthday. Because Shiro's stupidly friendly, they keep making small talk over Keith's head until the bartender comes back with the drinks. That's when Shiro nudges Keith and goes, Why don't you pick up our drinks? In a way that makes it clear it's not a suggestion, even if it's phrased like one. Reluctant as anything, Keith turns and picks up the drinks from the counter. Maybe the only saving grace is that Shiro keeps both his hands on Keith's hips. One of Shiro's thumbs rubs a gentle circle over the divot of his hip. Say thank you, he says. I don't expect. For some reason, Griffin looks mildly pained as he holds up a hand. Like he can stop Keith from saying anything else. Thank you, Keith says. Slowly, Griffin's hand falls back to the bar top. You're welcome, he says, still mildly pained. Maybe a little deflated. Honestly, Keith doesn't care enough to dissect the complex expression he's working like a tragic hero. Even if he wanted to, Shiro takes the opportunity to start guiding him back to the booth. It's busy enough and he's tipsy enough that Keith's grateful for it. Shiro has a way of making him feel safe, even in the middle of a crowded room. Only after they're sliding into the booth does he remember that they'd left their friends playing another round of pool. And, actually, he'd left Shiro playing a round of pool. Don't you want to go back with the others? Keith asks. You were winning. That earns him a gentle cuff to the back of the head. I left the game when I saw what you were dealing with, Shiro says. Instead of withdrawing his hand, he lets his fingers dig into Keith's hair and tangle in the locks. You looked uncomfortable. Uncomfortable would have been a criminal understatement, but Keith knows better than to admit that. Thanks for coming to get me. Probably Keith should let it go at that. Enjoy their bodies pressed close in the booth and the quiet moment to be alone together. Sip at his local craft beer. Ignore everything and everyone else. So of course Keith does not let it go at that. Griffin said that I'm cock-blocking you, he says. Shiro actually does half a spit take, managing to stop himself at the last minute and pounding at his own chest none too gently after he manages to swallow. What the fuck? He says, with great feeling. Yeah, Keith says. Nudging his own beer away, he props an elbow on the table and then leans his chin on his palm. I don't think I'm that scary. That's not the takeaway he meant to go with. It's probably the least important takeaway. Focus, Keith. But, I mean, am I? Do you want to be finding someone hot for a one-night stand? No. Keith takes a contemplative sip of his beer. Liquid courage, or liquid stupidity. I'm pretty hot, he announces. I would make a great one-night stand. What? Shiro's fingers are still caught in his hair, which Keith only realizes when said fingers tighten and force his head to tip back until he meets Shiro's gaze. The lights back here are still dim and shitty, but Shiro's expression is an open book this time around, and that book reads, "What the whole entire actual fuck, Keith?" I'm hot, Keith says, mulish. People think so. You're not going home with him, Keith, Shiro says. It feels like they might be having two different conversations. The hand in Keith's hair keeps a firm grip, even as his free hand plucks the beer bottle out of Keith's hands. In this position, his jaw is just a breath away. He set it into a firm line that Keith wants, more than anything in the world, to nibble on. Don't want to go home with anyone. Which is true. Mostly true. Keith does, in fact, want to go home with Shiro. But I'm hot. It's important, vital even, that Shiro understand this last point. Hot enough to have a one-night stand with. Closing his eyes, Shiro leans down and rests his forehead against Keith's. It's a nice gesture. Soothing. Grounding, even. Now I know you've had too much, he mutters. If they weren't so tangled up in each other, Keith probably wouldn't have heard it over the general din of the bar. But they are so tangled up. Shiro. There's a too long pause. Or maybe the alcohol just makes it seem that way, before a hand cups his jaw. Keith puts up only a token resistance as Shiro directs his head up and to the side. Calloused fingers tighten on Keith's jaw until he couldn't pull away even if he wanted to. Trust me, Keith. I know you're the most beautiful boy in the world. It's the kind of hyperbole that Keith associates with people being dicks, but Shiro sounds oddly sincere. Maybe that's why Keith feels a shiver chasing down his spine. I am? Shiro doesn't answer, but Shiro doesn't need to answer. Not really. If he answered. If he said anything. Keith wouldn't have the impulsive courage to do what he does next. Which is collapse face first into Shiro's lap. It only works because Shiro lets him. And apparently, Shiro only lets him because he thinks Keith is either going to puke or take a nap. You okay down there? He asks. Somehow his hand is still in Keith's hair, though he's gentled his hold into something close to petting instead of the grip it was earlier. Keith almost misses the subtle tug at his roots. Hair pulling or no, Keith can work with this. Planting a palm against Shiro's abdomen, he turns his head to nuzzle at where Shiro's tucked. Left side. Shiro always tucks left. Keith mouths at the length of him through the denim and relishes the way Shiro's stomach goes taut beneath his palm. What are you doing? Shiro asks hoarsely. Gonna suck you off, Keith says, matter of fact. Sure, he's never actually done anything like this before, but he's figuring it out as he goes. Figuring out how to pop the button on Shiro's jeans is his first major challenge, which he does figure out, by the way, managing to get it undone and the zipper tugged down. That earns a low groan that Keith feels more than he hears, but Shiro's being difficult and won't lift his hips to let Keith shimmy his jeans down. Mouthing at him through the thin cotton of his boxer briefs is a good alternative, though, especially as Shiro starts to harden beneath Keith's eager licks and nuzzles. Shiro smells good and tastes better. The world narrows down to this. To Shiro's cock twitching against his lips, and Shiro's hand buried in his hair, and Shiro's body surrounding him in safety. Keith wants to purr like a sated cat when he feels those fingers tighten in his hair, just enough that his roots ache, and he wants to arch his spine. Maybe he moans. Shiro's hold gentles, and Keith suckles at the head of his cock through his briefs with all the desperate adoration he's got in him. Fuck, Keith. This time Keith does moan at the sudden pull on his hair. He looks up hazily and feels his stomach dip pleasantly at the wrecked expression on Shiro's face. We can't do this. They're both breathing a little too hard. You can't suck me off in a bar booth. Why not? Keith asks. That's his voice, he realizes distantly, edged with a hint of a whine and small and stupidly fearful. Don't you want me? The hand disappears from his hair, and for a few seconds he feels completely unmoored. Shiro. Hands hook under his arms and haul him upright. There's an easy strength to this, tempered by the gentle way he's resettled half across Shiro's lap. Shh. Part of him wants to be offended by the coddling. Most of him wants to accept the offered comfort. That's what wins out. Shh, Keith. You have no idea how bad I want you. Then let me... Keith, Shiro growls. Something about the rumble in his voice makes Keith realize that he's towing the line. It should scare him, he thinks. In a way, it does. Just not the normal way. The threat with Shiro's anger isn't ever violence, but disappointment. Keith doesn't want to disappoint Shiro, to be the source of Shiro's unhappiness, to be yet another burden that Shiro has to tolerate. Voice gone even smaller, Keith says, I'm sorry. With a sigh, Shiro rubs a hand up and down Keith's spine in a soothing motion. It's okay, he says, like he really means it. He grabs a glass of water. Keith's pretty sure it was Hunk's earlier, and puts it in front of Keith. I want you to drink this. His chin rests on Keith's shoulder as Keith picks the glass up. Small sips. Keith obeys and feels Shiro's jaw dig into his shoulder just a little. Good boy. You're not mad? Keith asks. Just to make sure. No. Warmth bleeds from Shiro's hand into the skin at the small of Keith's back. It occurs to him that he's all but surrounded. That he probably couldn't escape unless allowed. It's a good feeling. A safe feeling. Almost like they're back on their couch at home instead of in the middle of a crowded bar. I'm not disappointed either. I just need you to trust me, okay? You're too drunk to consent, and just let me take care of you, okay? Let me get you home. The next few minutes are a blur as Shiro rebuttons his jeans and condenses his presents into a couple of bags. Keith keeps sipping on the water, even though it doesn't really seem to be doing anything, because Shiro smiles every time he looks over and sees Keith obeying. Eventually, once Shiro's checked the booth for the third time, he runs his thumb along the corner of Keith's mouth. I'm going to get Hunk and Pidge, he says. to help me carry things out to the truck.
"'Kay,"
Keith says with an agreeable nod. Stay here. The command is clear, but it's softened by the way Shiro runs his thumb along Keith's bottom lip again. If Keith were a betting man, he'd bet that Shiro's not even aware he's doing that. Somehow, that makes it even better. Like Shiro can't help touching him. I'll be right back.
'Kay."
And then, to prove he can be a good boy, he takes another sip of his water. With a soft huff of amusement, Shiro steps back from the table and into the crowd. There's a few heartbeats before he turns to start looking for their friends. Heartbeats, or their eyes stay locked, and Keith feels oddly seen and doesn't immediately hate the accompanying vulnerability of it. It could be a few seconds or a few minutes before Shiro comes back with Hunk and Pidge following in his wake. Either way, Keith's finished his water, and he pushes the empty glass towards Shiro. Good job, Shiro says. One hand cups the back of Keith's skull. It's a gentle hold, his fingers warm and reassuring as they tangle in dark locks. Keith almost wants to whimper, and definitely wants to lean into the touch. You ready to go? Not really, but Shiro wants to take him home, and Keith doesn't want to be here without him. A few uncoordinated wiggles get him to the edge of the booth. Shiro offers him a hand, which is nice, and which Keith takes. Once he's on his feet, he's fine. Mostly fine. Passing a sobriety test is probably out of the question, but he can walk. Leaning on Shiro, letting Shiro take most of his weight, is entirely because who wouldn't lean on Shiro, if they could, with all his muscles and his warmth? No one. That's who. There's no one alive who wouldn't take the chance to have Shiro's arm around their waist as they navigated an overcrowded bar. It takes a while to get through the crowd to the door. After a bit, Hunk starts clearing the way in front of them. That's usually Shiro's job, but Shiro's job is keeping Keith upright. Pidge brings up the rear and sticks her tongue out at Keith when he tips his head back to look at her. Cold night air slaps Keith right in the face. He whines and turns his head, mashing his face into the warm crook of Shiro's neck. This is a double bonus. Warmer, and instead of smelling the asphalt piss desert scent of the bar's parking lot, he gets the cotton sweat home scent of Shiro. Keith breathes in deeper and then lets out a giggle that's probably closer to a coyote yip. Is he going to be okay? Hunk asks from somewhere to the left. I've never heard him make a sound like that. Bless Hunk. He actually sounds legitimately concerned. Out of everyone in their friend group who isn't Shiro, Hunk is Keith's favorite. And this is why. Awkwardly, Keith tries to lunge for Hunk. They need a hug. Like, right now. Hunk gives the best hugs out of everyone who isn't Shiro. Except it turns out that Shiro is still hugging him. Kind of. Or at least there's a heavily muscled forearm digging into Keith's solar plexus as he tries to scramble across the distance to his other best friend. Most of the time, they're pretty evenly matched in strength. Keith might be lean, but he did his time on the rigs hauling welding tools. But now he's reminded that, when it comes down to it, Shiro's maybe a little stronger, and if he wants to keep Keith pinned against his side, then he can. Whining breathily, Keith collapses against Shiro's forearm. Shiro grunts at the sudden dead weight, but keeps them both upright with a powerful flex of his arms and core. I've got him, Shiro says. This is officially the hottest and best thing to happen to Keith since nuzzling at Shiro's cock in the booth. Keith's mouth waters. He's not sure if it's because he needs to puke or because he still wants to choke on Shiro's cock. Maybe both. Probably both. Shiro. He manages to get out around the sudden flood of saliva. God, this is gross. Gross and hot. Don't feel... No, that's wrong. He feels a lot, but none of it is good. Frantically, he paws at Shiro's chest, fingers snagging on the other man's tea. Smacking his lips, he tries to swallow down the worst of it. Shiro, he says again. It comes out clearer this time. Shiro, hold my hair. Immediately, Shiro's prosthetic fingers comb back his bangs. The cool metal feels magical against his overheated skin, and he nuzzles into the touch. Are you going to be sick? Shiro asks. No? Keith pauses, thinks about it, smacks his lips a couple more times. Yeah, he feels a little queasy, but he's never drunk puked before. Now doesn't seem like the time to start. I don't want to, he says, a little surer this time. Pidge's low cackle fills the parking lot. There's a few clicking noises, almost like a camera shutter. It's a good thing Lance left earlier, Pidge says. More clicking noises. Otherwise, these would be going on Snapchat. Delete those, Pidge, Shiro says. But my birthday, Shiro reminds, and With a groan, Keith curls over Shiro's forearm, digging his fingertips into the warm skin hard enough to leave bruises as he dry heaves. Like a saint, Shiro keeps his hair held back. Nothing's coming up. Shh, comes the low croon. I've got you. You're okay. Keith nods agreeably and lets the side of his face mush into Shiro's bicep. You're what? Pidge asks. Because clearly she doesn't know a blissful moment that is not to be interrupted when she sees one. Buddy? Best friend? A pause that gives way to another cackle. Your babe? Baker! Hunk yells, then grunts like he's just been elbowed in the gut. He probably has been, for speaking over Pidge. Keith's not entirely sure what's going on, but he's got a vague feeling that Hunk probably just saved his life and deserves hugs. Hunk gives amazing hugs. The best hugs out of everyone who isn't Shiro. Keith feels more than hears Shiro's groan. If his arms weren't full of Keith, he'd probably be rubbing his eyes. How much did you two have to drink? Not enough, Pidge says, only a little mutinously. Hunk isn't mutinous at all, as he says. Don't worry, man. 7's the DD. It's hard to focus his gaze, even with Shiro's bicep stabilizing his head. But Keith's pretty sure the hazy yellow shadow holding out a hand in a placating way is Hunk. A barely audible, "Oh, thank God," ruffles Keith's hair. He giggles and squirms at the odd sensation. Shiro gives him a warning squeeze before turning his attention back to Pidge and Hunk. Good. After we get everything in the truck, you two go back inside and stay with Matt until 7 gets here. When he hands out commands, his bicep flexes and his forearm digs into Keith's stomach. It's nice. Keith needs to tell Shiro how nice this is. How safe. How fucking sexy. Words are hard, though, and his mouth tastes like warm beer and fuzzy caterpillars. Easier is to show Shiro. Keith rubs his cheek, kitten-like, against the curve of Shiro's bicep. More clicking sounds. Pidge, Shiro growls. Literally growls. Keith whimpers, cock twitching against his thigh. Delete all of those pictures. Now. I'll get her to delete it. When Pidge squawks, Hunk bravely overrides her despite the danger. Just get Keith home. It looks like he's going to pass out. Yeah, Hunk is a prince among men, but he clearly doesn't understand that Keith is an excellent drunk. Hasn't even puked, has he? Forget what he said earlier. He could probably pass a sobriety test right now. No, you can't, Hunk says, very gently. Fuck off. Keith doesn't want that kind of traitor sympathy right now. Sorry, buddy. Shiro, you need some help getting him to the truck? The real tragedy is that Shiro hums consideringly. Depends. On what is what Keith wants to ask. Are you going to be good, Keith? I'm gonna be so good, Keith says. Maybe he says it too loud, because he makes his own ears ring, and that brings back the nausea full force. Dry heaves send him curling over Shiro's forearm again. Pinned there by his own misery, he barely notices whatever exchange goes on over his head. It takes a good 40 seconds to get upright again. By then, their friends are gone, and the truck's cab door is open. You think you can get into the truck? Shiro asks. He sounds doubtful. Like, even if Keith says yes, he won't believe it. Which is fair. Keith also wouldn't believe it. Admitting that seems like quitter's talk, though, so he settles for a non-committal noise that Shiro correctly interprets as, nah, hard pass. Possibly because Keith's collapsing more heavily into his arms by the second. Okay, if I pick you up, are you going to puke? Dry heaving aside, this is officially the best day of Keith's life.
Nah, I'm good.
He babbles happily. Shuffling around, he flings his arm around Shiro's neck.
Pick me up.
Shiro snorts. You're going to be so wrecked about this in the morning. The copper yellow lights of the parking lot touch Shiro's face just right. All shadow and bright and contrast. Freshman year, he had to take an art class, and they called this chiaroscuro. Shiro looks good in chiaroscuro. Like an amused and benevolent god. Keith would worship him, if he could.
No, I'm not,
Keith says. With a wry smile, Shiro bends down. One of his arms, the prosthetic, presses into Keith's back. Hold on, he says. Doesn't wait for a response, just curves his other arm beneath Keith's thighs and lifts. It may have been a bad idea to promise not to puke. Keith groans, the sound muted due to the way he's clamping his lips together. The world feels spinny and unmoored. Hooking his legs around Shiro's hips doesn't help much. Another groan, urging into a whine, leaves him as he presses his face into Shiro's chest. His cheekbone nudges against Shiro's collarbone, and it's not comfortable, but it's anchoring. Makes it so he's pretty sure he can breathe through it. You good? Shiro asks.
I'm good,
Keith says. They start moving, slow enough that his nausea doesn't kickstart again. Shiro's good to him. Gentle and strong and good. It's why Keith wants to give him anything. Everything.
I'm always good with you.
That gets a chuckle, and normally Keith would be okay with that because Shiro doesn't laugh enough. Only with this, laughter means Shiro doesn't get it. No, he whines, fingers nodding in the back of Shiro's tee. Don't laugh. Sorry, Shiro says. I'm sorry. I wasn't laughing at you, buddy. You don't get it. Get what? Shiro shifts Keith's body so it's draped more firmly against his chest. It's probably good that the truck is already unlocked. Shiro just has to let go of his grip on Keith's back to open the passenger side door. It probably also helps that Keith's clinging to Shiro like an overgrown koala. Now that's a metaphor. Keith as a koala, and Shiro as his highly specific home range eucalyptus that he would die without. Not going home with anyone else, Keith says. Can't. Even though he's clinging onto Shiro, it's nice when Shiro's arm comes back and curls securely around his midsection. I know. Even though Shiro's not laughing, he still sounds amused, which means he still doesn't get it. Plus, he's trying to maneuver Keith into the truck now. Yeah, Keith promised to be good, but he doesn't want to let Shiro go. Frustration claws at him. No, he whines again, louder. You don't get it. Get what? Shiro asks again, patient as a saint. And if Keith remembers this in the morning, he really will be wrecked. Can't go home with anyone, 'cause you're home. Wrinkling his nose, Keith runs what he just said over in his head again. Not good enough. Tries again. You're my home. Only home I've got. So don't leave. 'Kay? Shiro inhales, sharp and tight, like taking a corner so fast on his bike that he can feel the ghost of the asphalt. When he exhales, it comes out as a ragged croon. A flex of his arms brings Keith higher up his chest, cradled more firmly, like he's afraid of someone trying to rip Keith away. Below Keith's ear, his heart beats hard and steady. I've got you, Shiro promises. I won't leave. I won't ever leave you. I've got you. And Keith's not sure how, but he knows. Deep in his gut, tucked alongside the blossoming hangover, that something just changed.